Hello and welcome to episode 357 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as sometimes with
Ned Russell.
Ned, thanks so much for joining the show once again, stepping in on behalf of Jason, who's actually going to be joining us later in the show with our good friend Jeremy Dwyer-Lindgren. They are in St. Martin this week, and the tone of my voice certainly tells you that I'm thrilled for them and not at all jealous.
No, not at all jealous, as we are freezing here in Washington and Chicago, Ian.
It actually got above freezing today over the past couple of days, so that's nice. It's mud season now.
Oh, lovely. Well, our snowcrete is slowly melting.
Yeah, there you go. They escaped to St. Martin, and they've been up to absolutely nothing whatsoever except a few of the flights that I absolutely wish I could have been along for. But we'll talk with them a little bit later in the show and hear about their adventures in the Caribbean. But we'll turn now to El Paso, Texas, where who knows what happened this morning. For roughly 8 hours on the morning of Wednesday, February 11th, today as we record, the FAA closed airspace between the surface and 18,000 feet around El Paso to all traffic, not all passenger traffic, not all general aviation traffic, not all cargo traffic, all traffic, including military traffic, medical evacuation flights, everything. They said, you can't fly there.
Ian, can I just say, this is crazy. I saw Pete Muntian from CNN was saying, even during 9/11, medevacs and stuff were allowed to fly. Like, this is an entire closure, which is really unprecedented.
Yeah, and what's even more bizarre is that the closure was scheduled to last for 10 days. The initial NOTAM said for special security reasons, that airspace will remain closed from February 11th through February 21st. And they didn't say why.
Nor did they seem to tell any airlines, Ian. I heard from multiple sources that airlines were caught completely out of the blue. They're like, wait, what? There were, I believe, 17 airplanes on the ground this morning, according to stats, just waiting to depart.
Yeah, and as it turns out, it caught everybody off guard because the FAA didn't tell anyone they were going to do this. Based on reporting from multiple sources, including CNN, CBS, and others, we've come to learn that this was a unilateral decision by FAA Administrator Brian Bedford in order to preserve safety in the face of possible drone weaponry usage by the U.S. military in the vicinity of El Paso. The United States military has been developing counter-drone drones at the military base attached to El Paso's commercial airport. So they've been working at Fort Bliss on these weapons that are designed to interdict drones, specifically drones that are being used by Mexican drug cartels. El Paso, being a border town, makes this the perfect place to do so. However, there has been a fight between the FAA and the Department of Defense over how these weapons are to be used to ensure the safety of commercial aviation, how the training is to be done to ensure the safety of commercial aviation, and what warning or precautions should be put in place to ensure the safety of commercial aviation. The FAA administrator today felt that there was enough of a threat to aviation safety that he unilaterally decided to close the airspace to all flights.
I think I understand where Bedford's coming from on the risk. We absolutely do not want any risk to commercial aviation. But this really seems like it could have been a 10-hour shutdown while they figured things out and then talked to airlines going, okay, we need more days here rather than 10 days from the jump. That's just, wow.
And then what happens is there's a meeting at the White House and the entire NOTAM is lifted. It's not changed by the length of time. It's not changed by the scope. It's not restricted to certain periods or anything like that. It's just lifted and gone.
Just in time for when I was about to publish a story, too.
Exactly. We all got our stories ready. And over 10 days, how many flights it would affect, getting gathered statistics and all that good fun stuff. And then they were like, no, we were just kidding.
Measuring the distance to Albuquerque, the next closest major, I'm using air quotes here, airport. What is it going to mean for travelers? And then it was just lifted. Yeah.
And then it didn't matter anymore. And this was raised by someone on social media who is both a longtime journalist following aviation and a pilot themselves, Alex Fitzpatrick. His point, and it's well taken by me, is that this does not bode well. The lack of coordination between the FAA and the Department of Defense, even after a year-long investigation into a mid-air collision involving a commercial regional jet and a U.S. Army helicopter, is troubling, I think, to say the least. And to have seen this, I'm looking at this, and I would love to hear other people's thoughts. They can email us at podcast@fr24.com. And Ned, I'm keen to get your thoughts on this as well. I'm looking at this as Bedford wanted to force somebody's hand. I think he knew that a 10-day blanket closure of airspace in El Paso would get someone's attention at the DoD and in the White House.
It absolutely did, that's for sure. But I agree with you, because Bedford is a smart guy. I've interviewed him many times over the years as CEO of Republic. He is not someone that goes out and just does something without having a reason. He's not just, let's throw darts at the wall and figure it out. I like that theory that he was doing this to get someone's attention, because he is not the kind of guy who would just, let's close airspace for 10 days with no warning.
The reason that I'm kind of leaning into that is that there is a trapezoid-shaped area along the border that remains closed. There's a TFR for that area west of El Paso that remains closed. But the eye-catching NOTAM that closed El Paso and its environment up to 18,000 feet to all traffic, that went away rather quickly. And to me, that says, okay, then this was the flag that we were sending up, and message received somewhere. So great that there is technology available, if necessary, to counter unknown aircraft. From a technical standpoint, it sounds like they're laser beams, and that's cool too. But also
lasers, pew pew.
Yeah, I mean, it's I just need some frickin' drones with some frickin' laser beams on them. But what happened here? And so I think over the next couple of days, and by the time the podcast comes out, I think we'll have a bit better idea. But the fact that this is happening between the FAA and the DoD, and then spilling out into what is a ridiculously expansive NOTAM and disruptive NOTAM, to make a point, that, again, troubling it at best.
At best. And I like what you say about the lack of coordination is very concerning, especially, I think some of our listeners might not be familiar with the geography, but El Paso is not close to anything. You close airspace there, you're disrupting travel for a lot of people. Not a huge area, but it's not somewhere you can just drive 30 miles down the road to the next airport. But yeah, I really was hoping after the PSA and the Black Hawk planes went down the Potomac, we'd have open lines of communication. But that appears, maybe we could be wrong, but it appears to not be the case as much as we would be hoping.
Yeah. Well, let's head down to the Caribbean. We're going to leave Jason and Jeremy out where they are and enjoying the airplanes now. And we're going to talk about Cuba, because Cuba says it's out of fuel. The country, writ large, has no more jet fuel. What happened is that the United States, after its military operation to remove the president of Venezuela and basically install the vice president as acting president, blockaded Venezuelan oil into Cuba. Cuba relies largely on Venezuelan oil for jet fuel. The United States has also threatened sanctions on any country doing business with Cuba with regard to oil sales. So Mexican shipments of oil and jet fuel to Cuba have been stopped as well. And this has led to 9 airports across the country, Havana and 8 other regional airports or international airports as well, from not having any jet fuel. So airlines have been either not affected at all or have completely stopped operations, or they are tankering some fuel and then refueling outside of Canada or outside of Cuba.
Yeah. And for those unfamiliar, tankering is they're flying enough fuel to make the round trip so they can get back. But it's only doable if you've got a plane that can do that. Miami, Havana is not a very long flight, so I'm sure American has no problem putting enough fuel on that for the round trip.
Yeah. Most U.S. airlines are completely unaffected because they're flying from Florida, most of them anyway. And so they can just hop down to Cuba and fly back without needing to refuel. Now, they're taking a bit more fuel than they would otherwise would, but for the most part, they were probably already doing that anyway, given all the restrictions and issues dealing with ground handling in Cuba already.
Yeah, I was going to say what's interesting is Cuba, a lot of Canadians go to Cuba for vacations, for the beach destinations, and we're seeing pretty much every major Canadian airline, Air Canada, WestJet, Air Transat, have canceled flights or running tanker flights. That's pretty remarkable because they have there's a much larger market of Canadians going to Cuba than there are Americans. So it's like, wow.
Exactly. Flights from Canada are far enough that it becomes uneconomical or physically impossible to tanker in enough fuel to make it all the way back to Canada. So Air Canada, WestJet, and Air Transat are all winding down their services. So they're flying empty aircraft to Cuba, loading up, and then heading back to Canada. Air Canada, for its part, said that at the beginning of the week had 3,000 people in Cuba that it needed to bring back to Canada. And the other airlines had numbers along the similar lines. So they're winding down their operations. U.S. airlines are mostly unaffected, and other regional airlines like Copa and some other Caribbean islands. And then there are airlines that are flying from Europe that are affected in a variety of ways. Turkish Airlines is refueling in Cancun before flying back east. Iberia is using Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. But the one that caught my eye is Russia.
Yeah.
They're not stopping for fuel.
Wow, to catch your eye. That seems tough considering Russia is thousands of miles away from Cuba.
So not only is Russia thousands of miles away from Cuba, the Russian flights need to fly a circuitous route to avoid the Nordic countries. So if you're flying from Moscow or St. Petersburg, you need to fly north out over the Arctic Ocean and then turn west to avoid flying over Finland, Sweden, Norway. And that adds track mileage. So I looked at some data, and the round trip track mileage from Moscow to Veradero is 11,904 nautical miles, which is more than 4,000 nautical miles beyond the range of the 777-300ER, the aircraft that they're using for that flight.
Yeah.
So if they're not refueling magically somehow, they're taking on fuel in Cuba somehow, some way. So that's an interesting story, one that I would be happy to report on by traveling to a Caribbean island and researching more. But because unfortunately I can't do that.
Assignment, Ian. They're going to say, you got to do some in-person reporting down in Cuba. Definitely in February, for sure.
Right. Yes, when it's freezing in Chicago. But that one strikes me as very interesting. So I'm keeping an eye on that to see if they can keep that up and for how long, or they have some sort of magic mid-ocean 777-300ER air-to-air refueling thing that no one's ever seen before or since.
The island of Atlantis. It just pops up long enough for the 777 to land.
Long enough.
It disappears again.
Perfect. I love when economic and geopolitical forces come together to help us discover the lost city of Atlantis.
Exactly.
Elsewhere, tomorrow, the 12th of February, so yesterday, if you're listening to the podcast on Friday when it comes out, Lufthansa pilots and some flight attendants will be on strike. This has the potential to affect, yes, again, because there's still more things that we're upset about. And what the pilots are upset about now is ostensibly pension payments. So the public rationale for the strike at the moment is that the shift from a here is what your pension will be when you retire to thank you for putting money in. Things are based on market conditions, so the amount of money you make when you retire could change. They're saying that market conditions at the moment have changed significantly. Therefore, the airline should contribute more to the pension. And so they've been having contract negotiations and struggling through that.
Shocking. Lufthansa struggling with contract negotiations
Right.
with their pilots and flight attendants. Really surprised there.
Yeah, a huge surprise. That's the ostensible reason for the strike. The timing is also very interesting because as of, Monday, Lufthansa City Airlines started up in Frankfurt.
Yes, this is Lufthansa's latest subsidiary of their dozen or so that is basically a lower cost operation designed to do short haul flights around from Frankfurt and Munich using 320neos initially, and they've got a bunch of A220s on order.
So what will happen here is that they'll wind down other subsidiaries, and then folks that are operating on those subsidiaries will then be stuck because they can't go work for Lufthansa Prime. I learned this week. It's an issue of flying aircraft with the Lufthansa livery.
Okay.
The mainline Lufthansa livery. So if you didn't go through the Lufthansa Training Academy, you can't fly Lufthansa liveried aircraft. But theoretically, and I'm sure this hasn't happened, but theoretically, the way the contract's written, they could have a special subset of pilots that only fly the Star Alliance livery aircraft.
Huh. Okay.
A special livery aircraft, the way the contract is written.
What is it, Lufthansa?
Right. Yes. Yeah. Lufthansa.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So they can either take a pay cut and go work at Lufthansa City because it's another low-cost carrier, it's another contract, it's another way for Lufthansa Group to cut its costs, or they can look elsewhere.
Labor arbitrage.
And either way, they're at the back of the seniority line. So you're looking at literal decades of hoping to stick around at one airline long enough in order to move up in seniority. So they're not happy. And it sounds like there's going to be a full-on strike on Thursday. It does not sound like they will reach any type of agreement before those flights are canceled. So if you're flying or if you were scheduled to fly on Thursday, we are sorry that this has happened to you.
Yes. And just a quick note, all of Lufthansa Group's subsidiary airlines should still be flying on Thursday, but that does not help you if you're on Lufthansa mainline. So we're sorry to you.
Right. This is the VC union for the Lufthansa Prime pilots. Also affected, I believe, are Lufthansa cargo flights. So flights operating in the Lufthansa cargo livery, not necessarily the AirLogic livery, which is a joint venture between Lufthansa and DHL. And I need a flowchart or something. That's what we should do. We should put a flowchart together to try and figure out the relationship between all of these different subsidiaries. Because my brain hurts.
I love it. It's just about everybody. But yeah, we definitely. Right. One of the more complicated airline groups.
If there's a more complicated airline group, I don't want to know about it. I have enough trouble with Lufthansa. Let's just leave it there.
You and me both, yeah.
But we will shift from Star Alliance over to SkyTeam to talk about what happened late last week to an SAS flight that was attempting to depart Brussels Airport. The A320neo the pilots decided that a taxiway was good enough, or perhaps in reality just didn't realize they were on the taxiway and not the runway when they began their takeoff roll, reaching more than 100 knots before stopping the takeoff roll, slamming on the brakes, and coming to rest just off the taxiway into a grassy area, or partially into a grassy area. This was just, in so many ways, not good. We talked about this a little bit, and it just so many things to investigate here. How did they not realize they were on the taxiway? How did they get so far into the takeoff roll? What was going on there? And then one of the things that scares me the most about this incident is that the fuel depot is at the end of that taxiway that they were on.
Ooh, that could have ended that poorly, for sure.
This could have been so bad.
Yeah, I'm looking at this. I mean, it was 10 p.m. at night there, so yes, it was dark, but taxiways, airports go to extremes to make sure taxiways are lit differently from runways. So you really have to wonder how they mix the two up.
Yeah. So SAS, for its part, says that the departure in question was interrupted due to an irregularity. You don't say.
Seriously.
And an investigation has been opened both by investigators in Brussels and an internal investigation by SAS. So hopefully we will learn more about this. The weather was good. No significant weather conditions that would affect visibility or anything like that. As Ned noted, it was 10 p.m., but lights were on. So maybe we'll learn something that was contributing to the incident. But glad no one was hurt and the aircraft was not damaged and was able to be put back in service relatively quickly.
Yes. And we're very happy that this had a positive conclusion and did not end up as a tragedy.
Absolutely. Not being put back into service relatively quickly is a LATAM 777 that we have discussed previously when the preliminary report came out. However, we now know more about the issues that went into the LATAM 777 dragging its tail along the runway in Milan. Calling it a tail strike, I think, is a gross understatement. It's more of a VMU test. They dragged the tail along the runway for a long time, and investigators have now noted why, technically, that happened. In the course of preparing for the flight, the crew received the final load sheet about 10 minutes prior to departure. There were 3 captains on the flight deck: a captain in training, a line training captain, and a cruise captain. So all 3 captains on the flight deck. One of the pilots was computing the expected fuel consumption and miscalculated the flight's gross weight. So that calculation should have been 328 tons. The pilot came up with 228 tons. That led the V speeds to be much lower than they should have been. So the aircraft should have taken off at about 180 knots. The aircraft rotated at 150 knots. Because of that, the tail was dragging down the runway for a very long time. About 12 seconds after they rotated, the cruise captain, so the captain sitting in the jump seat, said, "Why don't we use full thrust?" And the pilot flying engaged full thrust. The aircraft finally lifted off at 178 knots with just 800 meters of runway remaining, 21 seconds after they rotated.
That is not much runway.
No, it is not. They were only 155 feet in the air by the time the aircraft crossed the opposite runway threshold.
Yikes.
Whew.
I mean, I'm just really glad this didn't end in Portmore, just not end worse than it did. I mean, the aircraft required some 7 months of repairs, but thankfully no one was injured in this. So
exactly.
Yeah.
No one was injured. They took off, they climbed, they dumped fuel and returned to Milan, where the aircraft sat for months. When they were investigating, damage was initially found on the tail strike protector, the tail, the APU fire protection system. Then they started taking the airplane apart and found enough damage that investigators reclassified this from a serious incident all the way up to an accident. So a lot of damage.
It's really good that the pilots decided to return to Milan and not try to continue on their flight. Like this could have got,
Exactly. The investigators detailed what went into the failures and how the miscalculations were made, but then also the fact that none of the pilots on the flight deck cross-checked those reference numbers outside of that calculation, that other pilot's calculation. No one referenced the load sheet. They just took those numbers as the truth and then all worked off of those. And the report says that the computer said no. We can't do that. When they entered the weight in, they said, wait, I can't calculate a V-speed based on this. Something's wrong. And at no point did they say, okay, that's odd. We should try this again. They just said, oh, that's odd, and took off anyway.
It reminds me of that old Little Britain sketch. Computer says no. If that happens, I think that's a good time to be like, okay, let's try this a different way. It's not just accept the numbers that the computer says no on.
Exactly. But the aircraft, after about 7 months, did in fact return to service. And this is a long-awaited final report. So we'll put a link in the show notes to that one. But that's a 100-ton mistake. That's costly. Ned, let's you and I take a quick break and let Jeremy and Jason do some work down in St. Martin. You're going to hear about a few flights that Ned and I are not at all jealous we did not get to go on this week.
No, not at all.
So we'll be right back with that.
Hello, and welcome to this special on-location segment of AvTalk. I'm Jason Rabinowitz here as sometimes with
Jeremy Dwyer-Lindgren.
Hello. You know, anytime the two of us are together on location somewhere, we're doing something either pretty exciting or pretty stupid. And I think this trip, we checked off both boxes, didn't we?
Yeah, I really think we did.
We did. I flew a JetBlue A321 down here from JFK. What did you fly down here?
I took a Contour over from San Juan.
That's right. On our first take of this, which I wasn't actually recording, you just mentioned the United part, which was also least interesting. But how was Contour, real quick?
Contour's fine. Yeah, it's a 40-minute flight. I mean, realistically, how wrong can you go? It was one of the... I have flown with them before, Phoenix to Page County, I think it was. Yeah, and they had an absolutely fantastic flight attendant on board. And this one was great, too. Just quick, easy.
E135, right?
No, this is the 45.
Oh, the big part of the fleet.
Yeah. I mean, they still only have 30 seats in it, so, you know.
Cushy. That's nice. So here we are in St. Martin. In the last couple days, you have knocked out two things. I was a coward on the first one. And on the second one, we did get out. But what did you do 2 days ago?
2 days ago? What did I do 2 days ago? Time
Begins
means
with
nothing.
a T.
Oh, right. I finally knocked out the Trilander.
What the heck's a Trilander?
Well, it's something that a kid drew back on the back of a Denny's map and then got put into production, I guess. But basically, it's an Islander. It's made by Britton Norman. I think they made him in the late 60s, early 70s, something like that. And they decided, what if you had an Islander, but it was bigger? So they extended it from, I think the Islander is 8 seats, something like that, out to 18, I think is the capacity. And they did it by literally just extending it. They didn't make the cabin wider. They didn't do anything. They just extended it backwards, I don't know, about 10 feet, and then slapped an engine on the tail of all things.
A BN2 Islander is like a mainstay of island hopping between resort islands. Here in St. Martin, I believe there's an entire airline called SXM Airways that only uses BN2 Islanders, I think.
Yeah, there's one right there, actually.
There it is. You probably can't hear it, but there it goes. But there are a select few out there, very few left, where they took a BN2 Islander, lengthened it. Literally, it looks like they just slapped a third engine on the tail and said, this is good. I think there are very few Trilanders left out there. Do you know what's the status of the fleet? Because it can't be many.
No, it's not. It's airworthy is 5. Actually, flying is probably closer to 3 or 4. There's a couple in Guyana doing charter work, 1 cargo, 1 passenger. There's one operating in San Juan with Air Flamenco, all cargo. There's one that's believed to be airworthy but hasn't operated in almost a year, Vieques Airlink.
And who did you fly?
And I flew with Anguilla Air Service, which operates the last remaining scheduled passenger version.
Every now and then, and only kind of when they feel like it.
Yeah, there's no obvious rhyme or reason. If you check on the website, they can't. You look at the flight, and it's just listed as airplane. You know, there's no telling what it's going to be every day. It's just when the capacity warrants it, or if they do charter work with it, stuff like that.
So how did you end up on board the aircraft? Because you had clued me in on your plan to do this a while back, and it was just, the plane hadn't been flying for weeks.
No, it had been flying regularly through December and January, and then as of the 31st, it just dropped out completely. Part of the peg for doing the podcast was we're talking with the CEO, me, Jason, and Ian, on trying to get some sort of, you know, we're not looking for a comp ticket, but can you help us figure out when this thing might fly?
Right, we don't want to be on board for free. We just want to know, how do we book the thing?
Right, and can we? And we didn't really hear back at all until, a couple days before the trip? Suddenly we got a bite.
Sorry, that's an odd pause just because we had to turn and look. who is arriving over Maho Beach right now?
BN2 Islander.
There you go, mainstay.
Yeah. There's at least 3 carriers.
So a couple days before, we hear from the CEO saying, like, what are you doing and why?
Fair question.
Doesn't really matter. We didn't really hear much back until the morning, 2 mornings ago at like 7 a.m.
5 a.m.
5 a.m. You call me frantically. I'm sleeping because I'm on vacation and I'm not having any of this. I am not waking up early. You're like, we gotta go. I know what flight to book. Book it. I don't have your passport information. We gotta go. I'm like, what? I'm not even awake yet. Leave me alone. Come back later. But you booked it. You had a false start. You went to the airport, and the plane actually went back to AXA empty without you.
Yeah, it came in. The CEO let us know around 5 a.m. that it was going to fly out on an afternoon 13:45 departure. And I was like, great, that's fantastic. And then I saw it come in as I was calling Jason, which it wasn't supposed to have. Anyway, it all ended up working out. Got the ticket. The kicker was that it was a 15-minute connection, international connection.
That's the point where I was like, no, I'm opting out of this. I don't want to get stranded on another island.
That was particularly risky for me because I've had vertigo on and off for the past month. And like, if I missed that and that connection did not pan out, A, I wasn't getting a Tri-Islander. And then B, I was going to have to take a ferry back, which is frequently described as choppy. So anyway, that was going to be a nightmare. But
not only did you get the connection, but the return flight was being held at its origin by the CEO waiting planeside for you, Jeremy Dwyer-Lindgren.
Yeah, it got a little intense kind of quick.
So real quick, before we move on to the next topic, how was the Tri-Islander flight? Did it meet all your expectations? Did all 3 engines work?
All 3 engines worked. It was great. It doesn't feel all that different from an Islander. You can feel the back weighing down a little bit more, which is common with any heavy jet. You can kind of feel that weight pulling down in the back. Pilot loves it. CEO loves it. It does well for them. And it's a neat plane to fly. I'm sure we could talk history on it all the time. It's a weirdo. And they're only down here at this point. So it's super fun.
And if you're a big group in the Caribbean looking to charter a gangly-looking aircraft that can fit like 18 people, and you all want to go in one shot, who should they give a call to?
You should give a call to Mr. Carl Thomas at Anguilla Air Service because he will make that work for you.
We thank them for putting up with Jeremy reaching out so many times.
It wasn't that many.
It was enough.
I would describe myself as highly motivated.
Persistent. Next topic, where it gets really fun. This was one I really wanted to...
For both of us.
For both of us. I wanted to check off the bucket list for a long time, and that was you could call it, steep approach into St. Bart's, which is an island not more than a 6-minute flight out of St. Martin here, with an endless array of flights per day, I think on like 4 different airlines. You've probably seen the videos on YouTube or on social media of St. Bart's being the airport where there is a dramatic hill just before the runway. There's also a road at the top of the hill with a traffic circle and a lot more traffic than I thought. And really, really intense winds the day we went, which our season pilot described as interesting. And oh my, was it interesting. So we actually took a cab out to the other airport here at St. Martin, SFG, what's the name of the airport?
Grand Case.
Grand Case, thank you. And we flew with St. Barth Commuter, which, shockingly, they're based in St. Barth. We took
I was as surprised as anyone.
It's surprising, yeah. We flew not a Twin Otter.
Grand
Caravan, thank you. Cessna 208. Full house, full load. Unfortunately, someone beat us to the punch in asking for the right seat because this was a single pilot operation, which I thought was also quite interesting. But I guess there are only so many pilots certified to do this approach because no ordinary pilot can just decide to go to St. Bart's any given day. You have to be certified for this landing.
And we found out why.
Because the winds were quite strong. It was also a bit rainy that day. This was just yesterday, wasn't it?
It was.
And yeah, I've been to a lot of places on a lot of airplanes. This was by far the most dramatic, the most interesting, the most heart-pounding, adrenaline-rushing, probably 30 seconds of my life, I think.
Yeah, it's got to be up there. I think the only competitive one for me was the Japan Air approach in 2025.
Oh,
but that was scary fun. This was fun.
This was like, there is one guy here, and it's just him and a machine. They are one at that point. Because
he was just so locked in, so on top of it.
So locked in, such a professional. And the winds were really actually fierce. We're not really exaggerating this. We'll link to my video on Blue Sky. But at some point, right before we really hit the mountains, things got really interesting. And I don't know how common it is to get a stall warning on this particular approach, but we sure got one. And the instant visceral reaction from the pilot of throttle up, nose down, real quick, almost instantaneous because it's instinctual, was just super impressive and reassuring that this guy knows what he's doing and he's done this 1,000 times. But the most interesting, scary part, I think, is when we just hit the crest of the mountain and the wind shifted 180 degrees on a dime right before you nosedive into the runway. What did we see at that moment?
Well, when we were coming in, we had a pretty hard crab. The runway was solidly out the right side.
Oh, we weren't even near a line.
No, not even near a line. And then as soon as we hit that hill, all of a sudden the wind shifted and the crab went in the opposite direction. And suddenly we were crabbing 30, 40 degrees in the opposite direction within a few seconds as we were going down the hill. We went down the hill sideways.
Yeah, it was dramatic. And I'm not going to compare it to something you would see in Top Gun, but I'm also not going to not compare it to that because it felt like...
If Top Gun was it was caravans, I think
this would be it. Yeah, there's not much more you could do with that aircraft. I think that would be more dramatic than that, or nor would you want to. And then just like that, we touched down, the greased the landing. We explored the little airport we had exactly 2 hours there after Win Air shifted our flight 19 times the day before.
To end up back where we started. Anyway.
Right back where we started. I think we ended up 15 minutes later than we originally anticipated. But they've got a beautiful little airport there on the French island. But we walked up to the top of the hill, saw some arrivals that were not quite as sporty as ours, or at least they didn't look like it from the ground. I think we either lucked out or we're very unlucky having one of the most dramatic arrivals of the day. I think lucky.
I think for us, lucky. I think for everyone behind us, I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
But we were thrilled.
It was thrilling. And then as soon as we got there, we boarded one of the 90 Win Air flights on the way back. 2 went out at the same exact time because I don't know why Win Air does this, but they schedule an 11, an 11:05, and an 11:10, and they all go out at the same time. And then there's nothing for another hour. And then it's another 3 flights. It's a very strange operation. But it was basically just get on the plane. Go. And then it was 6 minutes in the air and 2 left at the same time. 9 minutes in the air, but 2 left at the same time. And we actually beat into SXM the flight that went out first from St. Bart's, which was interesting.
They went out after us.
Did they?
Yep.
Oh,
they had more luggage to load.
Oh, so somehow we beat them because we just didn't have as much luggage. But it's a weird operation here at SXM too. I don't really fully understand the air traffic pattern and flow because
it's nonsensical.
It doesn't make sense. In the time you think they could pump out 4 departures, just nothing happens.
Well, that 30-mile finals.
Yeah, it's a real interesting place. But I think St. Martin and St. Bart's in particular, if you happen to be here, spend the money, do that day trip just for fun. It is really, it really is worth it. SXM St. Martin is really, I do think it does maintain its reputation as AvGeek paradise. You've got the beach, you've got the resorts. We are sitting on the rooftop of my hotel looking directly at the entire runway and Maho Beach. Of course, there are no airplanes right now, which is why we're recording this as a bit of a break. But if you have the means, if you're nearby, or if you want to take one of the 3 Air France KLM group flights a day that all come in at the same exact time, again, don't really understand that, you should do it sometime in your life because it's a really, really nice place. Any parting words?
It's got everything. And I think that's the kicker. You can plane spot and you get all this weird stuff. You can take weird airplanes. You can go to cool places. There are other beaches like this. There's Phuket.
Yep.
And that's a very good one. But you can't do crazy stuff in a Trilander or pick up an absolutely insane approach just over the water. You can't beat it.
And with that, I think I hear something of notable size going out. So we're going to go look over the railing and see what that is. So for now, from St. Martin, I'm Jason Rabinowitz here as sometimes with
Photo JDL. Remember to stay hydrated.
And where can we find you?
Anywhere is Photo JDL.
All right. He was really distracted because we got to go find out what's taking off now. Yeah. Goodbye. Back to Ian, I guess.
Welcome back. Ned, which flight are you less upset about missing? The Trilander or the absolutely bonkers arrival into St. Bart's?
Oh, geez. Ian, you ask me the hard questions. Okay. Less excited about missing Trilander because I'm all for that bonkers arrival departure into St. Bart's. So,
it was videos in the show notes from Jason that Jason shot. By all means, go watch it if you like interesting flying. Don't watch it if you have a fear of flying, because I don't think this is one of the things that'll help. Unless, exposure therapy is your thing. But, oh man, that looked like so much fun. All right, let's turn to the business of aviation, where Frontier this week announced as part of its 2025 earnings reporting that it will ditch a bunch of aircraft. It's going to return a bunch of aircraft to lesser AerCap, terminating 24 A320neo leases from the current fleet. It will then also defer deliveries for new Airbus A320neo family aircraft from 2027 and 2030. So the 3-year period is going to shift back to 2031 to 2033.
Yeah. This is fascinating news because you and Jason have already spoken about this many times, but the ultra low cost sector in the US is under a lot of pressure. Costs rose dramatically during the pandemic and revenues have not kept pace. And that's why we've seen everyone from Frontier, Spirit, Allegiant, JetBlue adding more premium products. I don't know if Frontier has first class officially, but they've adopted the big front seat that Spirit had and all these things in the hopes to bring in more revenue. But the fact that they're returning aircraft, that is surprising. And that really raises questions about where the ULCC model fits in the US, because that's not growth. Even though they're saying 10% growth in 2026, and my guess is they're getting this off the back of more higher density A321neos than actually adding more flights.
Yeah, the plan now is scaling back to 10% growth throughout the airline over the long term. Their plans were greater, though we'll see how that works out. Frontier said it lost $137 million in 2025 and made a profit in just one quarter, the last quarter, of $53 million, ending December 31st.
Again, surprising because generally their peak is summer, but yeah.
Yeah. So for its part, Frontier thinks that bringing down the fleet will help with its overall performance and that it will save them money. That said, it's very difficult for ultra low cost carriers right now. And it's also very difficult to shrink yourself to profitability, especially in the airline business. So I'm very interested to see. They're not shrinking the fleet entirely, but they are definitely slowing the growth. So maybe that's a good thing, but it does not portend well for ultra low cost carriers generally. And it puts it at odds with new CEO Jimmy Dempsey's statement that they are, quote, encouraged by demand trends. Which trends would those be?
Right. If demand is so encouraging, exactly. No, and to your point about shrinking the growth, I mean, we're watching Spirit go through bankruptcy and they have shrunk dramatically and we are not seeing them. I mean, they still have yet to file a standalone or merger reorganization plan, so that tells us that whatever they're doing, debtors are not happy with it yet. Yeah, you're right. Frontier isn't shrinking, but slowing growth, that really just raises questions. And also, I want to say Frontier has this unique, they've been raising a lot of money off of their fleet by doing sale and leasebacks. This is where the airline immediately takes delivery of a plane, immediately sells it to a leasing company, and then leases it back from that leasing company. It's more of a financial transaction than anything physical. But they make money off of those. And so by slowing deliveries, they're going to slow that revenue stream, which is interesting because that revenue stream has kept them in the black for some quarters in recent years. So very curious what this means. I mean, it does mean they're going to have to make more money off of the thing they're supposed to actually do, which is fly passengers from A to B.
Well, good luck to them. How about flying passengers from A to B to C? That's what AirAsia X is up to.
Ooh, sounds fun.
They have begun London flights via Bahrain, or they will very shortly. This is very interesting because they're planning on doing this with narrow-body aircraft. So they're completely reconfiguring the airlines. They're ditching their A330neo orders, and they're teasing a large narrow-body order so that they can operate more frequent flights from Asia to Europe, and they're planning on doing it via Bahrain. And it's super interesting to me because they're also considering the idea of creating a AOC in Bahrain so that they could operate flights not just through Bahrain, but to and from there out and back directly. The whole reconfiguration of the business model here is just fascinating to me. They're like, okay, why not? And obviously, Bahrain is no stranger to being used as a stopover point.
Not at all.
Look where Concorde went, especially.
Yes.
So this is nothing new. It worked before. Why not try it again?
Right. Well, first of all, speaking back to our Lufthansa chat earlier, speaking of an airline that's complicated, the AirAsia Group has long been another one of those complicated airlines with different AOCs and subsidiaries in different countries. But this is fascinating. I'm old enough now to remember when AirAsia tried to do Kuala Lumpur, London nonstop for the first time, and that didn't work out. Bahrain does make sense for them, having a Gulf stopover. We've seen that become a very profitable model for the Gulf carriers, building a hub there. But I mean, at this point, all I see them doing is having a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Bahrain onto Gatwick. And so you're still going to be having to double connect at least, unless you're traveling from Kuala Lumpur. So it's fascinating what they're doing. But I mean, it's great for Bahrain. That's an airport that, like you said, used to be a major stopping over point between Europe and Asia. Got passed over for Dubai, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi. And this could be a real turnaround for it. But at the same time, you need people to fly it to make it worth doing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So they're building it. We'll see if the people come.
Yeah, exactly.
At American Airlines, the unions representing the pilots and cabin crew have recently called for changes at the top. The Association of Professional Flight Attendants and the Allied Pilots Association, within 3 days of each other, both issued votes of no confidence. They have lost confidence in management's ability to correct course. It sounds like ISM might be in trouble.
Yeah, well, so far the board has seemed to stand behind him, but let's say I'm not surprised. ISM has been under fire from multiple points in recent years. The airline American took a hit on revenue when former chief commercial officer Vasu Raja was there and his change in sort of the sales strategy. They backtracked on that some. The airline still has not come back. They had a tough summer operationally last year, which we saw with their new plans to add more banks in Dallas-Fort Worth to spread that flights out a bit more. The fact that ISM is raising the ire of their unions does not surprise me, because with the network and fleet that American has, you would think they'd be doing a lot better than they are. And they are definitely lagging United and Delta, at least on the profitability front.
That's basically what the union said as well. Hey, we think we're pretty great. We think we have great airplanes, we have great people, and we have a pretty good product. We should be doing better, is their argument. And that strategy and leadership from the top has failed. So they're saying all of this talk about how great American Airlines is, we've lost so much ground to our competitors, Delta and United. We don't have any faith in your continued leadership. But Ned, as you rightly note, the board has stuck by him thus far. We'll see how long they continue to stick by him.
And that's something that can change quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, the question everyone's asking is, when does American start to install seat-back personal entertainment screens and economy? That's something that, since Doug Parker was CEO, they've repeatedly said no to. But as a parent with kids, and I know you appreciate this, Ian, I increasingly prefer those flights where I have something where my kids can watch that's not just their tablet. So,
Absolutely. Yes. CPAC screens for all. Yeah. Among other things, there are so many things that we can discuss about American Airlines where they haven't lived up to expectations and they haven't lived up to their own promises. So it'll be interesting to see if the board continues to believe that ISM's the person to lead the airline, or if they think a new direction is necessary.
Absolutely. Like I said, they've got a great domestic network. They go a lot of places. They have, I remember those omnidirectional maps that they presented when they merged with US Airways more than a decade ago. It's interesting, and I don't know the answer to this, but they have just underperformed, and it's curious because they have a couple really strong, really profitable hubs. They have a lot of international reach, but they're just not hitting the mark for whatever reason.
Yeah, exactly. I guess speaking of not hitting the mark, in a bizarre twist of fate, maybe these 787s are just cursed. Indigo is learning the same lessons that Norwegian learned years ago, which eventually resulted in them getting rid of their 787s, which Indigo now flies. Indigo is paring back its long-haul network, having expanded too far, too fast, and become operationally unreliable. They've axed the Copenhagen route. They are paring back flights to London, and they are retrenching with the amount of aircraft they have, operating fewer flights so that they can have a bit more padding into their schedule and become more reliable. Does that sound familiar, Ned?
I was going to say, haven't we been down this road before? Yeah, I mean, even if Indigo wasn't familiar with the lessons of Norwegian last decade, which they should have been, I mean, they themselves had a big meltdown in December that we're going to talk about shortly about overscheduling their crews. So does anyone ever learn, really? It's just like, why do we need to keep repeating these things?
Hubris, I guess. But as Ned mentioned, yeah, the Indigo had a major meltdown in December. That was the result of not having enough crews available to meet new crew rest requirements for Indian regulations. Because of that, Indigo ended up canceling thousands of flights over a week. And now India's competition authority is proceeding with an investigation to understand the meltdown and determine if the airline abused its dominant market position as part of the causes of that meltdown. So what they want to know is, was Indigo's dominant market position, because Indigo carries a vast majority of domestic traffic in India.
Well over 60%. Well over, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Was that position abused? Was abuse of that position something that led to the situation that occurred where Indigo didn't feel the need to have the crews in place ready to follow these regulations? That's an interesting investigation.
That is. Maybe I give the airline the benefit of the doubt here, but I think my opinion of this is they are a low-cost carrier. They almost certainly were scheduling their crews as tight as they possibly could. But did they mess up? Did they abuse their dominant market position? I don't know. It is crazy when I read about these disruptions. And the airline carries so many travelers in India. When we were talking about airlines here, when American or Delta or Southwest has their meltdown, those airlines only represent like less than a quarter of the U.S. market. So most people are doing fine. But when Indigo melted down, it meant people all over the were just affected because most people fly in Indigo. So it'll be interesting to see what they find. I seem to think that it's probably just overscheduling, but what do I know?
Right. We'll find out. And to close out the show, we head to remote St. Helena, where the airport has been downgraded from a Category 6 airport to a Category 4 airport. That is because their fire tender is down with some issues. And because of that, the airport cannot operate commercial flights until those issues have been resolved.
That seems like a problem for anyone wanting to get to St. Helena.
Big problem. So now Airlink cannot operate to St. Helena. They did, however, manage to secure Category 4 status, so that allows them to operate medevac flights and any emergency flights that might come up. So small aircraft can still land there, but the larger Embraer regional jets that Airlink was using to fly to St. Helena cannot operate until later in February. So they've been down since the beginning of February, and it sounds like it's going to take another week or so in order to get all that taken care of. Not a great situation.
Yeah, no, I mean, and passengers aside, this St. Helena is remote. I hope they're not expecting food shipments and other critical, medical equipment that they need on the island coming in by flight, because you said medevac flights are still good to go, but I'm just thinking about the price of milk and eggs and whatnot for anyone there.
It's already so expensive. I don't even want to think about what it would cost if there were shortages involved. Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
but
seriously.
It sounds like they have a plan to bring the airport back up to Category 6 as quickly as possible. So hopefully they'll be back operating normally on or about the 20th of February.
Good.
Hopefully they're back in action soon. Ned, I want to thank you so much for stepping in this week in place of Jason and his travails around the Caribbean. Jason, I think we'll be back next week if he can make it off the island, and we'll go from there for our next week's episode. But Ned, thanks so much.
We might have to go down and get him, Ian.
Oh, that would be terrible. That would be so rough. This has been episode 357 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as sometimes with
Ned Russell.
Thanks for listening.